the elderly people are this great repository of history. And although modern world brings us all this technology and advances in so-called labor saving and life saving and so forth and so on, if we don't stick a good fork into the history and teach it and experience it and learn from it, we're going to have trouble getting into the future. And I feel like that this book helps create perspective in that respect also.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, the author podcast, where we bring on amazing authors from around the world. Now imagine our author today serving people, helping them with their health, and being a caregiver for many, many years. Now, as an author, taking his words and sharing his thoughts through writing with us as an author. I'm really excited to have Marc here on the podcast. And we had a little chat before we jumped in, but we're here to talk to you about Marc's journey as an author and to support you as a reader with some great things that we got to show you today. Marc, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. So glad to have you on the show.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
Excellent. Marc, tell everybody where you are in this great, big, fabulous world of ours.
I am in Berkeley, California, on the West Coast, and it's a cool day here. But over the hills, it's probably 90 degrees already, but it doesn't get that hot here by the coast.
There you go. When I'm up in Canada and I'm jealous of your the temperatures and the beauty of where you live, it sounds like a great, I've never been there, but it sounds like a great place.
Yeah, California is very varied. Mountains, desert, everything. Ocean.
Everything, right?
Yeah.
Are you born and raised there, Marc?
No, I was born in New York City, raised in the Bronx, and also when I was young, we moved to Yonkers, New York, just north of the Bronx.
Awesome. Yeah, I had friends in Bushwick, and I would go down and visit quite often. I love New York City. I love all the boroughs, and
yeah,
I don't know. As a Canadian, it felt like a movie set every time I went there.
I do too, but I've spent most of my life right here in Northern California.
Good stuff. Awesome. So, Marc, tell us a little bit about your author journey, your background. You've been working in healthcare and helping people for many, many, many years. What was the idea for you to become an author and start writing stories?
Well, I always loved writing, and when I was in college, I discovered that probably could write pretty well, and I thought about even making a career of it then. But the American literature teacher that I took the course with in college, I asked him, "Do you think I could write?" And he said, "Well, it's just such hard work, and it can be very lonely work and so forth." And I didn't wind up going in that direction, but later on, I couldn't stop writing. I always wanted to write, and I married a woman who's there in the background from early on in our time together, who is a writer. She's a short story writer, and I'm jealous of her. So I had to start self-publishing and so forth after I retired from major medical work.
Tell us a little bit about your career as well, Marc. Who did you serve, and kind of a little bit of your background?
After I got out of medical school, I spent some time with the United Farm Workers as a doctor, United Farm Workers Union here in California, and then after that in a number of community clinics. Went back to school to get my master's in public health in epidemiology. I was, for a short while, I was a public health officer, county public health officer, and helped start then after that, I helped start the Berkeley High School Health Center, and went on to become the medical director of this geriatric program that led to the production of this book, the I'll Fly Away, stories about amazing disabled elders. The book came sort of naturally to me. I hadn't really wanted to do geriatrics, but I was recruited by a classmate from public health who thought I was the perfect fit for them. I still was reluctant, but they sent me to look at the model that they were developing. Initially was over in Chinatown and here in San Francisco. And it's called the PACE model, Program of All-Inclusive Care to the Elderly, for the elderly. And it was such a brilliant model. It's so powerful model in terms of it's integrating social and medical aspects and culture and so forth of people's lives. That I really kind of felt like this is really nirvana as far as practicing medicine, instead of just what's a fairly isolated and sterile relationship between a doctor and a patient in an exam room. We're very engaged with and involved with people's families and their lives, and in a community setting. So that got me interested in writing about all these folks, and I was writing essays about different participants in the program, the patients, from the very beginning. And I even started I started something called a Reading and Reminiscences group, in which we invited some of the high functioning people they attended these day centers. That's part of the model. And I invited them into a group where we read some stories, and then people talk about their lives, things that bubbled to the surface from the stories we read, and recorded all that material. But that gave me a wealth of rich stories from other people's lives to begin to write these essays about the people in the program. And I just kept writing them while I was there. But of course, I was doing medicine so intensely, I didn't have time to write a whole book. But once I decided to retire, when I got to 60 years old, from that work, I didn't retire from medicine. But once I decided, it's because I was, as a medical director, it was very intensive. I was doing hospital care and as well as supervising people and so forth. So once I left there, I had the opportunity to turn it into a book and to write more essays.
The one thing I'm noticing as I kind of look at the world, Mark, is that there seems to be more of the older population than there is of the younger population, with birth rates not as high as it have been historically. Then a lot of us on the path of getting older, there seems to be more need for support for elders in our communities. How important is it for you to write this book at this time so that it's relevant for the people that are reading?
Well, I hope it's relevant. That's up for the public and the readers to decide. But you're absolutely right. We've known this. That was 1986, 87 when I was in public health school, and it was already quite obvious that the population was aging in general, and the percentage of older people was going to continue to grow long on into the future. And part of it is due to improved healthcare. Although life expectancy has continued to gain in many parts of the world, you may have heard that in the United States it's going backwards. But which nevertheless, our population is aging just like everywhere else. And so that's how I started becoming interested in dementia and studying aging when I was back in school. But I still hadn't thought I was going to do geriatrics. I just wound up that I got invited to do this, and it was the right time and the right place to do it.
To tell us more about I'll Fly Away, what was the idea about compiling all these stories together in your book?
Well, originally the first title I came up with was called In Concert, and I was actually communicating with the writer Oliver Sacks, the neurologist, famous writer, who encouraged me to write it. I called it In Concert because we were working so intimately with the families in a community setting, and the program is team-based, and the team meets every day, and the team is multidisciplinary. We have occupational physical therapy, social workers, the day center workers, even representatives of the transportation system, the drivers that bring people to the day center, and so forth. And so it's very obvious that we were all working in concert, including the patients, the participants. So I wanted to call it that. But it, it was stimulated just by the experience. I mean, it was hard work, but very, very interesting and amusing and fun for me. I hope it was for the other people who worked in the program. But the participants got a whole lot out of it because it's not like going to the doctor. I mean, they go to the day center and a great music program. Some of the stories are about the Center for Elders Independence developed a play acting group that performed, and they went out all around the Bay Area performing, and a choir that they called the Heavenly Choir that sang mostly gospel music, but other music too. And so it was really a very, very it was a total community in itself, and a very diverse experience that just called out to be written about. Now, people have written about it in terms of the medical side of it and the successes of keeping people both alive, happy, and in the community, so they don't have to go into nursing homes and hospitals. It's very low hospitalization rate, very low nursing home placement rate. But I thought, well, and not enough of the human side of it is presented in most of the articles in journals, medical journals, and so forth. And I thought that it would be really interesting to have a book that tells stories, and that people would really engage with and understand that even the disabled elderly community, very old, in their 80s and 90s, and some people in their hundreds, can be really, or should I say, engaging. Can be really fun to if you pay attention to them. I think that's one of the problems with this. Probably not just a problem here in the United States, but as people age, they tend to be seen as less relevant to what's going on. Well, that's a kind of a stereotype that I don't find to be true. Of course, we slow down in our how much we can do and so forth, usually, but there's a wealth of history. It's also in the book. I mean, there were a lot of African Americans who moved to the West Coast, but they came out of the South of the United States. Some of them had parents who were slaves, or who they themselves might have lived on these farms where they were practically indentured servants. So, what do you call those people working? Live on somebody's property and
Right.
and do farm work, but very poor. But you have some amazing stories, and you couple that with the racism and the segregation and all the rest of it, and there's history there that we hear about abstractly, but you never hear it very often directly from the people who lived it. And so I think it's the elderly people are this great repository of history. And although modern world brings us all this technology and advances in so-called labor saving and life saving and so forth and so on, if we don't stick a good fork into the history and teach it and experience it and learn from it, we're going to have trouble getting into the future. And I feel like that this book helps create perspective in that respect also.
What gaps are the medical professionals today experiencing around elder care that we still haven't solved yet? Even with all of our technology and all of our everything, all the tools we have, there's still some gaps that our doctors are dealing with. Anything come to mind?
Well, let me start by saying I think there's been some significant progress. When I was first in medicine and starting to get interested in aging and geriatrics, geriatricians were sort of seen as sort of not people that were not doing real medicine as much, not as seriously engaged in medicine, because after all, they're taking care of people who already are beyond the pale in some senses medically and so forth and so on. And you're thinking about palliative care and dying and so forth. But that changed. There was a dramatic transition, I think. At first, it was simply that I noticed that a lot of physicians, when on hospital staffs where I was active, physicians that I admired, began to recognize how much medicine there was in what we were doing, even though it had a slightly different emphasis. I mean, we were interested in secondary and tertiary prevention rather than primary prevention. We are interested in giving people immunizations, but mostly, these are people with chronic diseases. And so we're trying to prevent those chronic diseases from becoming worse or even ameliorating all of their impacts on people's lives. And that's hard work, and it's medical work. And so that was the beginning of the transition. But then I think eventually geriatrics became something that a lot of people in medicine saw as a quite noble and a very interesting environment, because it does present different challenges, not less intense than some of the challenges that people see in caring for younger people. But what needs to change as far as aging care is what needs to change in healthcare in this country. I mean, you've got Medicare for all in Canada, and we don't. And not only that, now under the current conditions, we might even lose the Medicaid and Medicare that we have, starting with the attack on Medicaid, which will mean millions of people losing any access to care. But we already have the nonprofit clinic environment, which has been growing successfully in this country ever since the 60s, but it's under a lot of attack. And those are community-based clinics that do engage with the community, not to the extent as as much as a program that I was engaged with, that I was involved with, but still they are much more community-oriented and have much more emphasis on social work and dealing with people's problems with housing and other kind of, their unemployment and all these other kinds of issues, helping people with some of those things. That is being attacked right now. And so I don't know what's going to happen. But so the changes we need for the aging population are just the same thing, only, greater. The need is greater because people have less resources and less capacity, less independence. And so they need more support. But overall, healthcare in this country is in trouble.
Yeah, but the need as well, right? With the sheer volume of people aging into and requiring, care as elders, there's just a need for more doctors and more supports and more nurses and people who come in to the field to be a support to this growing community that's going to require this ongoing help, right?
Yes, but also doctors, and I think there's some training going on in this direction. But doctors need to be more integrated into the healthcare system in a way that's social and environmental, rather than simply dealing with the high tech medicine and the disease, the simple diagnosis and treatment. As a sort of simulacrum for what's happened in the negative direction is that there was a time when psychiatry, I mean, I'm not involved with psychiatry, but there was a time when psychiatry here was about therapy. A doctor, presumably expert in behavioral issues and mental issues, would sit down for hours at a time, weekly or whatever. And of course, rich people still have that kind of therapy, maybe very rich people that need it, but in general, psychiatry has become mostly giving people medications, which is the exact opposite of what I think elderly people need, and probably certainly what most people with mental illnesses need as well. We need to find ways to integrate people back into society, into the community, and that's true whether they have mental illnesses or whether they're simply aging. And the biggest hit on elderly people, I'm old, and the biggest hit on elderly people is a tendency to withdraw from a social engagement, to lose your support systems. And I don't mean just, caregiving, but I mean also your entire community. First of all, your friends start dying, and you don't have the energy to get out there and be playing around the way you did when you were younger with your friends and family and people you've known your whole life and all that. And so you need to have systems which involve doctors but are much broader in their social elements, I think. And that's one of the reasons. That's one of the things that attracted me to Center for Elders Independence, the PACE model, and I think it's so exciting. It's wonderful. You couldn't throw as much resources as we do in PACE to a less frail population, because it would be too expensive. If for the frail and disabled elderly, it prevents so much excess expense at the end of life and in unplanned admissions to hospitals and ICUs and all this that really aren't necessary if you already understand what people's values and their wishes are, what they do and don't want when they become very ill. Everything becomes titrated in a way that is much more sensible from their point of view and from a system's point of view, which actually gives you a lot of resources to use for these other things, like an environment where you have, hundreds of $1,000s into a transportation system to bring people to an adult day health center, and staffs that are looking at people from many different directions and can provide them with supports in the home or in other settings.
Tell us more about I'll Fly Away, Mark. You got 40 extraordinary elders contributing stories to this book. As a reader, I'm curious, is there a particular story kind of top of mind for you today that could be an example of one of the stories we're going to hear in this book?
Oh, there are so many. I like to tell the stories, and I'll be reading at book readings starting next week. But I like to tell stories where, first of all, unpredictable things happen, rather magical sometimes, that no one could know were going to happen, and really catch your sense of life being so rich and so varied and so unusual. This is not a medical story, but we had a dementia patient who was brought into the program by her niece. She was living with her niece, and her niece was a lesbian woman who had a partner, and the two of them were caring for this aunt who was had dementia. And that happened because it was an Italian family, I think, and it happened because the family back east had rejected the niece when they found out that she was gay. And the only one in the family that hadn't rejected the niece was this aunt, who had been really swell and supportive for her when she was not demented, And so when she started becoming a problem to be cared for, the family just, wanted to put her in a nursing home or whatever. And the niece said, "No way, we're going to take care of Aunt." I call her Aunt Lottie. That's not. I don't remember if that's her name or not, but we only use real names when people agree, when the families and the people agreed. So anyway, they brought Aunt Lottie into the program, and they knew that she was already at that point so demented that she probably wasn't going to live very long, and she had a various number of medical problems aside from her mental cognitive losses. And so they did not want her to have intensive hospitalizations and procedures and surgery and anything like that, which just makes a lot of sense when you got somebody who's quite advanced in dementia, because they don't know what's going on, and you're basically imposing on them. And so you have to just kind of be supportive. Well, so Aunt Lottie we took Aunt Lottie into the program, and she seemed to fit in okay. She was a mild and friendly kind of a person, even though her memory was shot. And everything went along. And all of a sudden, not that many months after she was in the program, but it's certainly in the first year, Aunt Lottie one day became unconscious. And the niece called me and said, Aunt Lottie's out of it. I can't wake her up. And so I said, I'll come down to your house, which is only 10 minutes away from where this was our first center. It was early in the program. They now have 7 centers at 7 adult day health centers. So I drove down there, and Aunt Lottie was breathing, and her heart was going normally, and she looked the same as she'd looked all along, but she was unconscious and she couldn't be roused. And I said, well, maybe this is a terminal event of some kind. I told the niece and her partner, here's what we can do. We can just leave her as is, and she will die from not eating or getting adequate fluids and so forth. Or we can put her on an IV for a while, see if she's going to recover, or we can try and do even more interventions than that. Well, then they said, no, we don't think she's ready to die. We're not ready to let her go. And so I put in an IV, and we set them up at home with IV fluids that they could change and keep her hydrated. I said, there's a risk that without protein, she will start to break down her skin, and that can be terminal and difficult to manage in people when they don't have adequate protein. They don't move. She's unconscious, right. And that will wear, the bones wear on the tissues, and you get big ulcers and all this nasty stuff. And they said, no, we'll do it. Well, these 2 women did more turning and care for Aunt Lottie than you would find in any nursing home anywhere in the country, and she never got any skin breakdown. But the interesting thing about the story, aside from their dedication to her, which was fantastic, they didn't want, when we tried to put in home care to help them, they didn't want that. They wanted to do it all themselves. But the interesting thing was that Aunt Lottie didn't die. And a week went by, and she didn't wake up. And 2 weeks went by, and she didn't wake up. And 3 weeks went by, and she didn't wake up. And she was just existing in an unconscious state, as if some of these people, like who are, I forget from trauma or something, or stroke or something, where you get into a state where you're not there anymore, although you're not technically dead. And closed-in syndrome, we'll forget what you call it. But at any rate, she didn't die. 6 weeks later, I was at the center, and I got a call from her niece, and she said, Mark, you won't believe this, Aunt Lottie just woke up. She looked at me, and she said, I'm hungry.
Of course.
And
wow.
I said, what? And she said, come on out, can you come down? You can see her yourself. I drove down again, and Aunt Lottie looked at me and smiled and said, I'm hungry. This is 6 weeks in a coma.
Oh my gosh.
And so they started feeding her, and they fed her and they fed her, and she ate and she ate and she ate. And whereas she'd been a kind of slender, svelte woman, elderly woman, she started gaining weight. She started ballooning up, and she just kept eating and eating and eating. And you would think, well, this can't go on forever. Well, it practically did go on forever. It went on for years and years. And
Wow.
eventually, with her weight, she became very hard to manage. And eventually, they exceeded to put her, we had to put her in a nursing home because it was so difficult to manage her. And she lived, and when she went to the nursing home, these two women visited her every single day and sat by her bedside and gave advice to the nursing home staff. They had given us lots of advice too. They were very sure they knew what we should do for Aunt Lottie and what we
Right.
shouldn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, just one of the stories.
See, no, that's a good example from the book. Who would you say the book is an ideal book for as a reader? Mark, who do you have in mind?
I have lots of people in mind.
Good.
I
I like that.
well, I mean, I'm a reader, and my wife's a writer, and so I love to read, and so I think people that love to read stories is one group. And then, of course, people who are taking care of elders, um, it's a very lonely situation to be on if you're the sole caregiver. And I tell
Right.
you, with dementia patients, our patients were not mostly dementia patients, but a good percentage. Um, but with dementia patients, it becomes very lonely because the burden, is only going to get heavier for you when they can do less and less and less for themselves. And I went through that with my own mother as well. Although I was not the caregiver, I was not involved with her care. She lived on the East Coast, and my sister lived near her. But anyway, so the caregivers need support, and I hope this book will give them some support and also a sense of how people have dealt with various situations that they face as well. So and then families who are coping with disabled elders, or maybe just people who are just aging in place and slowly losing their autonomy and their independence. I feel like a central part of the book is how to protect people's autonomy and their rights. And one of the stories about a guy who was a schizophrenic, a real seriously paranoid, chronic paranoid schizophrenic. The guy thought people were planting stuff in his body and controlling him and all this. Well, he said he was from a Latin American country originally, and he said he had to go back home to deal with a house and that his family was left from his family. And, but that these CIA and other people were preventing him because they controlled him and all this. So he was obviously out of his mind in a lot of senses, but we said, well, we have an ethics committee, so why don't we have you tell them about this and let's see what they think about you. You're going to a home because his representative payee was a Catholic charity across the street from that center where he attended, and the nun who was related to him, she didn't think we should let him go anywhere. I mean, because of his psychiatric condition. Well, she came to the ethics committee and he came to the ethics committee himself. He was all spruced up. He got himself looking fantastic. And he told them his whole story. And he was so compelling that they said, well, he's got right to do what he wants to do. His autonomy is important. Well, this is a schizophrenic with paranoia. And yet he presented himself wonderfully. And so that they recommended, I mean, they didn't have power. It was our team, medical team's, health team's responsibility, but they recommended that we let him go, but his son should go with him and we should contact his sister in the other country and make sure that everything was worked out and all that stuff. And so we told him that, well, we've decided that you can do this. It's okay if you can do this and we'll give you support and you don't have to worry about these people that are trying to stop you. And the St. Mary's will give you the money that's your money for your disability and so forth. Well, 2 weeks later, this guy had been really insistent about this. A week or so later, he decided he wasn't going. And what the reason I'm telling you this story is because I think that it was, in a sense, a little miracle that he was able to recognize that this was not a reasonable thing for him to be doing. Whether there was a house or not, I don't know. But he was able. He was cognitively able to make the right decision, even though you would have thought that would be impossible.
Right.
I think that we learn through these kinds of relationships that when you try and protect people's autonomy and their right to make decisions for themselves, you got to be careful. There's always risks, that things won't go that way. But when you do that, you are really doing as much towards quality of life as you could do by rescuing somebody from a stroke or a heart attack, and with all of the technology and everything else and stuff, because you extend their lives in a way that it begins to have a different quality. You improve the quality of life. You give them some self. I'm still here. I'm still somebody who can
Right.
handle things and can live successfully. So they needed the support systems, and yet they also need the autonomy. And this is something that families and caregivers have to struggle with all the time, because the tendency, like you are with your kids, you don't want to give them too much rope because they might hang themselves.
Yeah. Right.
But you got to watch out, because if you take away their ability to be living their own lives, then what do they have left? That's the whole thing. You want to keep people alive just because you want the body there in front of you to say, that's my brother or my father or something else.
Yeah.
No, you want them to have a decent quality of life that they
Right.
can laugh and smile and enjoy and tell stories about and all that stuff.
So the book came out just recently, right? For I'll Fly Away.
Yeah, the publication date was May 13th.
Good. And what's been the response so far, Mark? What are you hearing?
Well, the reviews have been fantastic.
Good.
I'm really proud of that. It's moved me greatly. We've got a lot of good reviews. As far as the readership, we're still in the phase where we're trying to reach out and get word out there, because I think even if people hear what is from me or from some of the reviewers, that the book is going to do well. But I think we're early in that, and it's not been quite as exciting as far as the book getting out there as I'd like. But those people that have read it have loved it.
Excellent. Tell us about your website as well, Mark. I want to send people to you so they can connect with you. Tell us a little bit about your website.
Well, I'm going to give you my personal email address, because I have a website, and actually, if people want to see what the first couple of stories in the book are like, they're up there on the website.
Good.
But I think if you want to communicate with me, I don't pay much attention to anything that comes in on the website, frankly. I just like
Okay.
direct contact with people. And
Nice.
so the website is my name, MARC, Mark with a
Yep.
C, which even my friends often get wrong, with a C, and Sapir, SAPIR, not ER, SAPIR, at gmail.com. And
Okay.
I'm happy to correspond with anybody about anything that they want to talk about. My website is marksapir.net. www, et cetera, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I can see all the information here for the book. I can see how we can connect with you, a little bit more of your story as well. I see songs on your website. What's this tab that says songs, Mark?
So when I was in college, I went to college from 1959 to 63, back on the East Coast at Brandeis. And I don't know if some of your viewers and listeners were around at that time. There was this terrible, scary event, or series of events surrounding U.S. relations with Cuba. The Bay of Pigs invasion happened, that was sponsored by the CIA. And then later there was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. We were very terrified of the possibility of a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. It was a very scary moment in history, and I wrote my first song about that event. Although the event itself is not it derives from that event. It's called Miss Liberty, and it's
Okay.
the Statue of Liberty. And after that, I started writing songs about the civil rights movement and various other topical issues. I played guitar from a young age, and although I played other instruments too, but that's where I wrote music through and sang them here and there, and eventually that kind of petered out as it got more involved in medicine. But when we started having kids and grandkids, I wrote a song for every kid, every one of the children,
Nice.
and then for every one of the grandchildren. And some of them are just little kind of ditties and so forth. But that's where it went. And then I wrote a blues number or two in the 80s, 90s.
Nice.
I'm not doing much of that anymore. And I don't hardly ever play the guitar. My main musical instrument is the bassoon. And I love the bassoon. I'm not playing it very much, but it's there in the living room, and every once in a while. I spent a few years after I was 70 or 75. I bought a used new bassoon, a new youth bassoon, a Fox, and I played it almost every day for 2 or 3 years, and actually began to feel like I was like a musician. Actually, you know when people play instruments or when they do any skill that you really become good at, the skill becomes an extension of yourself. The instrument becomes an extension of yourself. You no longer feel that you're wrestling with this thing or task or whatever, that it's just automatic. When you learn to drive a car, after, it doesn't take very long. After a month or so, you're not thinking about what you're doing. Everything's automatic.
Yeah.
Well, even the greatest skills of ball players and everything else, it becomes part of them. That's why they seem to be able to do amazing stuff. And so I started getting that way with the bassoon, but I didn't find any. I was already so old when that happened that I didn't find a group to play with or anything. So I'm back to square one, like where I was in high school playing bassoon.
It's nice. I like that music kind of ignites a part of our brain that other things just can't touch. It's that creative side, and just being creative, I think, is a good part of why I love music as well.
Oliver Sacks wrote a book called Musicophilia. I've read most of his books. It's a really interesting book about music. Music is, no one understands why, but music is a key part of every culture, human culture in the world. And of course, when you look at other animals, not just humans, there's music. There's music there.
Yeah.
And so it's got something to do with the richness of life. Music enriches life. And for birds, it's the form of communication that they use.
And it's all around us, and it takes us places too. You'll hear a song, and immediately you get transported back to a situation or a thing in your life, and you're like, oh, I just can be there in the moment just by hearing a few notes from that song.
The negative side is when you get one of those music worms stuck in your brain, and you can't get rid of it. And sometimes it's just an advertising jingle. And I've had one of those stuck in my brain the last week.
We won't talk about it because it'll stay in your brain.
I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Stay in your brain, Mark. Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for being part of the podcast. Congratulations on the book. And I'm encouraging everyone listening, as you care for your parents as they get older, as you yourself are getting older and you're looking for care, this is going to be a great book for you to hear some great stories from other people to encourage you and to give you some different perspective. I'll Fly Away. You got to go check out Mark's book and his website. And when you buy I'll Fly Away, please leave a great review for Mark. Mark would love to hear your thoughts and your comments about the book. That'll be a great encouragement for Mark as well. Mark, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us about your new book.
Thanks, Dave. Can I give a little pitch for how people can buy the book?
Please.
My at this point, my favorite place, which I don't get any money for saying this, but is bookshop.org. Because they contribute millions of dollars just to keep small bookstores, to keep independent bookstores going. I believe they, on their website, they say they have contributed $38 million to independent bookstores. And they also usually have about $1 off of the price as well.
Excellent. So we'll have your bookshop.org link as well. It's on your website. We'll include it in the notes from on the podcast as well. Everyone go there, leave a great review. Tell somebody else as well about Marc's great book, 40 Stories of Resilience, Identity, and Joy in Aging. It's I'll Fly Away. Marc, thank you.
You're sweet, Dave. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. Glad to have you here. I just want to let you know that you can always find out what we're doing live in the moment by going to our YouTube channel. Head over to livingthenextchapter.com. There'll be a link right there. Head over to our YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all the things that all the YouTubers love to say. And in our YouTube channel, a couple things. You're going to get advanced listens. You're going to get the episodes that we're working on in real time. So we record and post daily on our YouTube channel. I'd love for you to give us a follow over there. As well, we're making playlists. We have over 500 episodes. So finding the right episode for you, we're trying to group things into playlists. So if you like children's books, if you like business, you like historical fiction, we're grouping our authors together to make it a little easier for you to find your favorite next author. So head over to livingthenextchapter.com. And again, I'd love to hear from you. Hearing from the listeners of the show is great. And I just want to say thank you for being a part of the podcast family. And I look forward to having you back for the next episode. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and your listen. Take care.